I hear voices. They're all around me. I wish I could go back in time and tell myself never to play that damn game. They say I'm crazy, and maybe I am. Maybe whatever it is that haunts me took my sanity and hid it away, somewhere where it's impossible to find it, somewhere dark and sinister. Maybe they buried it deep into the core of the earth and it's just sitting down there waiting to be found. I sound crazy, don't I? You think I'm crazy? It's okay. I think I am as well. I'm gonna share this story, and I'm gonna share it as much as possible. I don't care if you believe me. All I ask from you is that you read this story and don't make the same mistake I made. I'm sure you've heard of true hauntings such as The Haunting of Connecticut and Amityville, and maybe you've seen the movie The Conjuring that was based on true events. You've never heard this one. Those hauntings cannot compare to what I've witnessed. Nothing can. It was 2005 when I came across some old abandoned apartment building. I had just finished the first semester of my senior year in college, and I was walking alone to my dorm from the bar. I was always alone. I didn't have many friends other than Jake and his brother Joel, my roommates. But they were always busy doing something else with their girlfriends, so I was always stuck alone, hoping that a bottle of whiskey would solve my problems. It never did. When I came across this old building, I heard this creepy and demonic melody playing from inside. It sounded like a music box and it was echoing somehow. I had this strange urge to go inside and find out where it was coming from. I threw my bottle of whiskey and it broke against the curb. I walked inside the abandoned building, something I would never do if I was sober. My footsteps echoed throughout the building as I walked the halls. Most of the windows were boarded and dust filled the air, clinging to every object that existed. I could actually taste the dust as it broke into my mouth and into my throat, making me cough. I moved at a leisurely pace. Dust spiraled up into the clouds as I wandered the halls, searching for wherever the music was coming from. I know it sounds stupid, but I was being drawn to the sound. It had some weird effect on me. I walked into the room and the music stopped. The room was just like the rest of the building, old, dusty, and dark. I used the light from my cell phone to examine the old paintings that hung on the walls. I noticed how weird it was that most of the rooms had furniture left in it. It looked as if whoever was living there just got up and left, leaving behind everything. As I searched the room, I had this overwhelming sense that somebody or something was watching me. I felt as if I were to turn around, something would be there. I turned around and I didn't see anything, but I still had a sense that something was there. Something was watching me. And then I heard the creepy melody echo from beneath the floor, and I had to find out where it was coming from. I don't know why, it just seemed like I was being forced to the sound, like I had no choice in the matter. The melody was coming from underneath a dusty rug. I pulled up the rug, dust scattered in the air like a dust storm. I felt the floor lightly shaking and it made a sound similar to a heartbeat. This sounds crazy, but it was almost as if the floor had a pulse. There was a door on the floor that opened up, leading to some storage area. It was a deep hole, around 12 feet, which is why there was a ladder made from rope. I climbed down the rope. Another thing I wouldn't do if I was sober. There wasn't much here, just some old books, a box, and a creepy ventriloquist doll with long black hair and big, round, dark eyes. I noticed a strange melody was coming from the box. I picked up the box and started to climb the rope. I couldn't help but to fear that something would grab me and pull me back down. I made it back up and I placed the game on the floor, shining the light over it with my phone. It looked like a briefcase, but it was made of what seemed like black stone with some strange word, Ikidomari, carved into the center. I brushed off the dust with my hand and I opened it. I noticed it wasn't a box or a briefcase. It was a board game. The structure of the board game was similar to the game of life, but it had a cemetery theme, and in the center of the board, it had what appeared to be a human heart inside a small glass dome. I've never seen anything like that before. It had 6 game pieces that took on the shape of tombstones and were made of real stone. On the right side it had a deck of red cards, and on the left were black cards. I noticed there was small writing carved on the inside of the game. If you dare to play, beware of demons. I figured it was all just for the scare, and so I did something I wish I hadn't done. I was curious, lonely, drunk, and curious. There was a wheel at the bottom right corner of the game that had numbers ranging from 0 to 9, and the objective was to spin the wheel and move your game piece to the amount of whatever number you spun. I placed a game piece on the starting point and spun the wheel. I watched as it spun around and around until eventually it stopped at 4. I was going to move my pieces up 4 spots when suddenly it began to move on its own. 1, 2, 3, 4, and then it stopped. I had froze in fear for a few seconds. Normal people would have probably ran off by then, but for some strange reason, I just kept on playing, assuming there was a logical explanation for it. I've always been that way. I've always liked what my father told me. Believe in nothing you hear and only half of what you see. Apparently, when I spun a 4, I landed on a black space. According to the game, black spaces meant that you had to draw a black card. Cards were more like tips or secrets. They weren't always bad. I picked up a black card from the deck. The words were in Japanese, but at the bottom of the cards, in smaller letters, they were translated in English. I looked at the card and read it out loud. Keep an eye on the doll. I looked over at the hole in the floor and I stood to my feet. I slowly walked towards it, lightly shaking. My teeth were grinding against each other as I got closer. I leaned over the hole and it felt as my heart knocked on my chest, begging to come out. There was no doll. She was just gone. I quickly left the old building and ran to my dorm room, which was just 5 minutes away. My roommates were all there with their girlfriends sitting on the couch when I burst through the door, suffocating in sweat and fear. I told them about what happened without leaving a single detail out. They didn't believe me, of course. I'm not really sure if I expected them to, but I sure hoped they would. They called me crazy, said I had way too much to drink, and they helped me to bed. I hope they were right. I'd rather be crazy than to know what had just happened was real. Almost a week went by and I'd forgotten about it all. I figured maybe it was nothing after all, and it made a bigger deal out of it than I needed to. It was almost an entire week since the incident, and I thought I was going to have to worry about ever going back to that old building. I thought that my troubles were over, but I found that they weren't even close. They were only just the beginning. Something strange happened to me. Something only explainable in a Twilight Zone episode or a Stephen King book. I was in school as usual, walking down the hall to my class. It was strange because I was the only one in the halls and the lights were dim and flickering. I heard a whisper as it echoed from behind me. Ikidomari. I didn't know what it meant at the time. I had no idea what was going on or why it was happening until I heard the music. It was that same haunting melody, and it echoed through the halls. I started walking faster, scampering down the halls, but it seemed like I was just walking in circles. Everywhere I went, no matter how fast I walked, I was going nowhere. I kept walking until I saw somebody, or something, at the end of the hall. I couldn't really see who it was because I was too far away, but it looked like a woman. She was in a white dress and her head was tilted at an unusual angle. Ikidomari, she said more than once in a very unsettling tone that echoed through the halls. She had a Japanese accent and I thought I was dreaming, but I was very much awake. She continued to whisper, "Come back, Gordon. We're waiting for you." I felt as if I was stuck in the nightmare that I couldn't wake up from. She kept talking to me. I had no idea how she knew my name. "Gordon, I see you, Gordon. Come back." The most creepy part about her voice was the somewhat happy tone and the way it echoed. I turned to my left and noticed I found my classroom. I walked inside. Everybody was looking at me like I was crazy. I guess they saw the fear in my eyes. I looked out into the halls and everything was normal, as if nothing ever happened. My teacher scolded me for being late and I took my seat. I was clearly the only one who was experiencing that nightmare, so I didn't want to bring it up, because I know that everyone else would say that I'm just crazy and losing my damn mind. They wouldn't have been wrong anyway. I waited until I got back to the dorm room to bring it up with my roommates. They again thought I was crazy and was no help at all. I heard the haunting melody every night while in bed and every morning while in school. Something was haunting me, and I know this sounds crazy, but it was the board game. I didn't know if it was cursed, possessed, or what, but it was haunting me, and it was driving me to the brink of losing my sanity. It was nothing but that melody for an entire week until one day, something strange happened. I was alone in my dorm room. The other guys were out on dates like every Friday night. I heard the melody as it squeezed through the cracking of my window. It echoed off the trees and right down into my soul. And then I heard a knock at the door, and it startled me because it was a knock that I'd never heard before. Every one of my roommates had a certain knock, but that knock was more like a pound, and every time I heard it I felt my heart pounding along with it. I slowly walked to the front door and I took a deep breath before opening it. My father used to tell me to count to 3 if I were ever scared, and then fight the fear with all I've got. I took another deep breath. The knocking continued and I slowly began counting. 1, 2, 3. I opened the door, but there was nobody in sight. I looked to the floor and there was an envelope. I picked it up and examined it. There was no name or anything. I opened it. My heart was knocking as I pulled out a black card. Ikidomari was written on the side, and on the other, "We're waiting for you." They were haunting me, probably watching my every move for the past 2 weeks. They wanted me to finish the game, and they weren't going to stop until I did. It was as if I ran into a dead end that I couldn't back out of. I kept the card in the sweaty palm of my left hand, and I waited impatiently and desperately for my roommates to arrive, as they were just as annoyed as I was when they heard me talking about the melody again. I told them about the knocking. I told them about how the game was haunting me and the only way to get it to stop was to finish what I had started. I guess showing them the black card was proof enough, because I was able to get them to agree to go back to the apartment with me. They said the only reason they were doing it was to get me to shut up about it, but deep down inside, I know they were doing it because they knew that something strange was going on. We gathered some flashlights and headed out to the old apartments. Joel brought his girlfriend Kenzie along with us. I didn't think they all knew exactly what we were getting into. I didn't even know, really. The only thing I knew is that I had to finish the game or it would probably haunt me for the rest of my pathetic life. When we arrived at the building, it had this strange feeling that something was watching us as we ambled our way inside. They followed me into the room, jokingly calling out to the ghosts that I'd believed resided in there on their way. I was startled by the appearance of the doll sitting against the wall next to the old furnace. Her cheeks, if I weren't imagining this, were smiling at me as I walked by. The game was just where I had left it, and it had started playing that creepy melody when I picked it up and placed it on the table. I was surprised to find that they were hearing it along with me. That was when I knew I wasn't going crazy. I wasn't the only one. In a way, it was a huge weight taken off my shoulders.
"Ikidomari? What's that supposed to mean anyway?"
Kenzie asked, looking at the carved writing on the board. She looked at me expecting an answer. I had no idea what it meant, and I still don't, but it can't be anything good. We all took a seat at the table, and all eyes were pretty much on me. I flicked the wheel and it spun, landing on 6. We all watched my game piece, but it wasn't moving, not like it did the first time. I spun again, landing on 4. Still nothing. I tried moving the piece manually, but it was stuck to the board, like it was trying to pull a nail from the wall with your bare hands. I figured that there must have been a reason for this, so I read the rules that were written on the bottom left corner of the board. I wish I had read them before I played. The rules were very horrifying, and they pretty much went like this. Welcome to the game of Ikidomari. For your safety, it was highly recommended that you read the rules before you play the game. If you place a game piece on the board and you spin the wheel, there's no going back. If you hit a dead end, and there's no way around it but to finish the game. The game will not end until there's one person left alive. Otherwise, it can never end. Note, this game is designed for more than one player, so if you are alone, do not start the game. Your consequences will be dire. Note, the game pieces tend to move on their own, so there is no need to move them manually. Not that you could anyway. Warning. Whomever dares to play the game, be aware that there can only be one winner, and that winner shall win the ultimate prize that sits in the center of the board. Those who fail along the way, rest in peace. Warning. Cheating is not tolerated and will result in dire consequences and an automatic ejection. When I found that the game meant everything that was said, the rules made it seem like this game was a death wish. I still to this day wish I had read the rules first. I wouldn't be here right now, surrounded by demons if I had. Everyone else, I guess, thought it was just a game. They had no idea how real the situation was. Since I apparently took my turn, Jake volunteered to go next. He placed a game piece at the starting point and spun the wheel. He rolled a 7 and his piece slowly moved up 7 spaces, landing on a light shade of gray, which by the way meant you didn't have to draw a card. Joel went next and he spun a 5, landing on a gray spot. Finally, it was Kenzie's turn. She placed her tombstone on the board and spun the wheel. 4. I knew instantly that I would be a black spot because I spun it the first time. Her piece moved up 4 spaces and she drew a black card from the deck. I took a deep breath, probably more scared than she was. When I saw her reaction, I saw the fear crawl within her. "Look, behind you," she read out loud. We all took our flashlights and pointed them behind her. "What the hell is that thing?" Joel asked, not really expecting an answer. "Wasn't that thing over there?" Jake asked, looking at me and pointing to the furnace. It was the doll. She somehow moved from the furnace to the rocking chair that sat behind Kenzie without anyone noticing. She was just sitting there, the chair rocking slightly back and forth. At that point, I'm sure everyone realized how serious and real this situation was. I heard their heartbeats echo throughout the room. They were just as scared as I was. I agreed to switch seats with Kenzie, who of course wasn't very comfortable with a creepy doll sitting on a rocking chair behind her. Not that I wasn't uncomfortable with it either. We got back to the game, trying to ignore the creaking of the rocking chair. It was my turn. I spun the wheel and it landed on a 7. My piece moved slowly. I counted the spaces before it could stop. It landed on gray. Jake was next. He spun the wheel and it landed on 5. His piece slowly moved and stopped directly in front of mine. "Shit," he muttered. He landed on a black spot, so he pulled a black card out of the deck and read it out loud. "It's okay to be afraid, because you should be." We were indeed afraid, and yet we were just getting started. The worst had yet to come. I took a deep breath, hoping nothing would viciously pop out at us. It was Joel's turn, so he spun the wheel and landed on a 4, a gray space. Kenzie spun the wheel and it landed on 0. Her piece did not move and it stayed on the black space. According to the rules, that would still result in drawing a black card. She pulled a card from the deck, took a deep breath, and read it out loud. "She's under the floor." We were all silent and we listened as a voice echoed through.
"It's dark down here.
The voice was echoing from beneath the floor.
I can't sleep, Gordon."
They all looked at me as if I knew what was going on. This woman or thing was haunting me. I heard a knock from under the floor, right beneath us. The air was so cold and we actually felt a presence run through us. It was a horrifying experience, but we knew we had to continue the game. It was my turn and I quickly spun the wheel and thankfully, my tombstone landed on a gray space. It was Jake's turn next. He spun the wheel, landing on 9. His game piece moved up 9 spaces and it stopped on red. We hadn't had a red space, so we had no idea what would happen next. All we knew was that the red cards were considered dead ends and were unpredictable and possibly dangerous. We didn't know at the time how deadly they'd be. Jake took a red card from the deck. We all took a deep breath as he began to read. A knock will rumble the room. Open the door or be doomed. We all looked at each other, our faces frozen in fear. Then came the knock. It was loud, more like a pound, similar to the knocking that took place earlier that day in our dorm. It did rumble the room, and it echoed right through us, our hearts becoming vulnerable and frail. Open the door or be doomed, I said, looking at Jake. I'm sorry, man, but you have to open the door. He looked at me and I saw the fear leaking from his eyes. His face was pale and he took a deep breath and stood up. We watched as he slowly walked to the door, realizing nobody had shut the door and yet somehow it was closed without anyone noticing. I had an overwhelming sense that something bad was about to happen. The room rumbled again and there was another loud knock. Jake finally reached the door after what seemed like an eternity, and he looked back at us. The longer he took, the more frightening the situation seemed. I couldn't blame him though. There was no telling what could have been behind that door. It could have been something demonic, something sinister. He took another deep breath as he slowly opened the door. I listened to the sound as it creaked open and I swear everything was in slow motion.